honor to see so many of you at our Pates grave sites. Make yourselves comfortable because we have a lot to tell you. I'm Emma DeBauer Pates, and I was born January 8, 1893 in Allison. I met my husband, Carl Pates, whose grave is right over there, at a wedding in my hometown. Now, Carl and his brother Emmett had come to Algona from Wisconsin as young men with their father. They were seeking good land at a fair price and found it in Plum Creek Township, 2 miles north and a half a mile west of Sexton. His mother knew our family, and that's how we ended up in Allison for a wedding. Carl was a hard worker and an enterprising man. Even then, he loved cars, and that's what intrigued me. I think Carl knew a good catch when he saw it, and he liked the food I made for the reception. He lived in Sexton at this time and walked to his farm each day with his horses, and then walked back to town at night. He didn't ride the horses because they worked hard all day at the farm. That was pretty thoughtful. He started building a house on the farm right after he met me. He was a planner, all right. We married, and I came to live on the farm.
I'm Elfrida Pates Clark, and I was born on September 1st, 1915, on our farm, the first child of Carl and Emma. I attended country school and then later Algona High School, where I graduated in 1935 with my sister Helen.
The girls were a year apart in age, but I needed Frida's help in the winter of 1931. I'd had a baby, Carolyn, who became ill and died at almost 6 months of age of undiagnosed appendicitis. That was a very sad time for our family. So much death. My 15-year-old son, Charles, also died in the winter on February 10, 1934, after a tonsillectomy gone wrong. He bled to death, and his passing was devastating for our family. Besides Frida, Helen, and Charles, we also had Madeline in 1920, Bill in 1922, and then baby Carolyn in 1930.
There were some terribly sad times, but in spite of all of this, life also had its highlights. One of mine as a high school girl was showing my Hereford steer at the International Livestock Exposition in Chicago. The steer was my only company as I traveled to and from the big city on the train. That was quite an adventure for a girl from the Iowa countryside. My father believed in advanced education for all of us, so I enrolled at Iowa State College and graduated in 1939 with a bachelor's degree in home economics education. I was happy to get a teaching job at Whiting High School. While I was there, the boys requested a class where they could learn how to cook and to sew. I discussed the idea with the shop teacher in hope that he would teach the girls a few days of simple car repairs while I taught the boys. He could not see any merit in this, so I reluctantly dropped the idea. When I went home during vacations, I became friends with my dad's new hired hand, Randall Clark. His grandparents had a grocery store in Algona near the courthouse, and my parents often shopped there. An aunt and uncle also lived in Irvington. He boarded with them while working for my dad. He didn't know much about farming when he came from St. Cloud, Minnesota, but he was a great hockey player and a handsome man. My dad agreed to take him on and teach him. I enjoyed his company when I came home from college, and we were eventually engaged. And I also know they did some fishing in the dark. I couldn't tell a soul in Whiting when I took my job, or I would have been fired. At the end of the year, I quit teaching high school, and we were married on June 25th, 1940, at Trinity Lutheran Church in Algona. After our marriage, we farmed in Plum Creek Township. Randall and I both love farming.
Our son Bill was a junior in high school, played first clarinet, a whiz at math, when Carl had his first heart attack. It was the Depression, and we needed a farmer. Ever respectful of his father, Bill had to quit school to help us out. A good mechanic who could fix anything, master finish carpenter, expert at mechanical and architectural drawing, he was also very active in the life of Trinity Lutheran Church, even helping to dig the basement for the new church with his tractor and loader. Bill married Norma Kettleson in January 1945. She was an experienced seamstress and a loving mother to their 2 daughters, Marilyn and Krista. With the encouragement and support of their parents, the girls pursued their dreams for education and good careers. Marilyn is a certified pharmacy technician and has been the organist at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in Iowa City since 1987. Crystal, a systems analyst, and her husband Jerry, a geriatric and intensive care pharmacist, are retired in Medford, Oregon and enjoy traveling. Bill was a master stained glass artist and taught several classes. His daughters' homes are blessed with many lovely pieces.
I felt sad that Bill didn't get to have the profession he wanted, but I found ways to keep teaching. I taught knitting in Algona's evening school program for many years. We started in January and met once a week for 10 weeks. I taught later in life in the Little Lambs preschool at Trinity Lutheran and helped rock babies and play with the children at Loving Hands Nursery. I also taught Sunday school for over 60 years. Believe me, there was Sunday school all summer long as well as during the school year when I taught. I gently reminded the education board at Trinity that children had problems during the summer too and needed someone to talk to. In my later years, I also taught English as a second language when that became a need in our community. I love teaching my own 3 children, Sarah, Linda, and Matthew, my dear grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren as well. Nature was my topic, and I could predict the weather quite accurately by watching the birds and other animals around our farm. The land was precious to me, and I was a real farmer with my husband. We milked Jersey cattle for many years. I had a large flock of chickens and a garden with both vegetables and flowers. I hope that I have instilled a love of gardening in my children, grandchildren, and members of my 4-H club. Yes, 4-H was in my blood, and I enjoyed being a leader. I was a member of the Iowa State Family and Consumer Science Alumni Association, chaired the Kossuth County Farm Bureau, and care team board member. I found great joy in living and in the people around me. My faith in God saw me through many challenges, especially the untimely death of my husband in a motorcycle accident in 1974, and my own health problems later in life. I died at Kossuth Regional Health Center in Algona on August 16, 2008.
I'm Madeline Pates-Preeb, so the 4th child in the family. Frida was a hard act to follow, as you can imagine, but I was a hard worker too. Like Bill, I was intrigued by a life that was different from life on a farm. I loved to read books about women who lived in large houses and managed households much different than mine. My mother had a copy of Emily Post's Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home, and I loved reading it. Sometimes when I was around 10 or 12, I would set up our table with all the silverware, glasses, and cups to simulate a grand table in a house with a maid in a uniform. Imagine that. The rest of the family thought I was crazy.
We understood at least a bit of this. My husband loved good cars and saved money during the Depression to buy a Kissel, a well-built car made in Wisconsin and a favorite of the British royal family. In later years, we always drove Cadillacs.
My love was sewing, and I made my own clothes as I grew older, trying to design them as fashionably as the ones I saw in magazines. I heard about Stevens College in Missouri, a woman's college, and what was then called a finishing school. And I hoped to go there after high school and have the right kind of clothes. My father, however, was a practical man. Even though I did get a scholarship to attend Stevens, it would never have covered all the costs. He was willing to pay for a state school in Iowa. Since that was not my dream, I stayed home. Meanwhile, Dad, who was a good judge of men, had hired the son of Clarence Preeb, a farmer near Lone Rock, to help him with farm work. His name was Burl, and he graduated from Bancroft High School in 1935. He was tall, good-looking, and had a gift of gab. He asked me to marry him, but he had to borrow $25 from a friend to pay for the ring and the marriage license. I knew that Burl had promised, and I loved him. We were married on August 18, 1938, in Blue Earth, Minnesota, when he was 20 and I was 18. Our lives at first were hard. We were farming on our own. I helped with the field work, milked cows, raised chickens, and sold eggs to Driesmans. I cleaned chickens each week for Van's Cafe, sort of where Kentucky Fried Chicken is now. The egg money went to buy my stove. For many years, I made custom drapes for the Crushilla store. I still loved well-made fashionable clothes, so I would get an expensive name brand outfit from a secondhand store, tear it apart to see how it was made, and then make one just like it. Fortunately, I had lots of energy, and so did Burl. We worked hard to make a living, even as our family grew. We had 2 daughters, Connie and Paula, and a son, Gary. There wasn't a lot of time for fun with the kids in those days. As time went by, we became interested in livestock, and especially Angus cattle. Burl always said there was no prettier picture than of black cattle on good green grass. As the children grew older, we began to show our cattle all over the United States. Burl was elected president of the Iowa Angus Association, and I served as president of the American Angus Auxiliary. In 1968, Burl ran for the Iowa House of Representatives, and I helped him campaign. When he won his election, I went with him to Des Moines and served as his unofficial ambassador. The Emily Post book I had read slavishly so long ago came in handy in many situations there. I did the same when he consequently ran for the Iowa Senate. He served in that position for 24 years. Gary joined us in farming, including land that my grandfather had purchased in 1893. In the 1970s, we were both instrumental in the acquisition of Terrace Hill to be used as the Iowa Governor's Mansion, and I raised the money for the new grand piano for Terrace Hill concerts. As a member of the Kossuth County Historical Society, I also helped acquire what is known as the Wells Fargo Building, now a part of the Historical Society's museum. It was a piece of Algona history that needed saving. My trip to China in one of the first years tourists could travel there was a high point of my life. I was a part of an Iowa delegation in the years when chicken was still served with the head on, feathers, beak, and all. That didn't faze me a bit. The concrete oozing out of the bricks in the hotel walls, that was a bit disconcerting. But I did enjoy seeing all the sights I had read about in books and meeting the people. In 1972, we built a beautiful house in the country south of Algona Airport for the Farm Power Show. It was our second new house, and you can believe that it had a well-planned sewing room. I loved entertaining and invited all of the members of Trinity Lutheran Afternoon and Evening Circle there for several years for their June picnic. We would fill the whole basement. We members of Delphian Society often met in my living room, and I spent many hours there working on projects with my beloved daughter-in-law, Jennifer. Burl, meanwhile, got into horse racing and owned several of his own horses. I must say that I still looked pretty sharp in my jeans and cowboy boots. During those years, we suffered the loss of our daughter, Connie, to cancer. She was married and living in Hinsdale, Illinois. Her fight was a long, hard one, and I was with her as much as I could be until her death on October 2nd, 1991. When I died on September 5th, 2010, my dear husband requested that all the salads be Jell-O because it was my favorite. We were really a great team.
Well, that's a little bit about the Pates family. There aren't any more Pateses around here, at least not with that last name. But we are glad that Brad Preeb, Jennifer Preeb, and Matt Clark still live here and have good memories of us.
Good evening and welcome to the Thompson Family Plot. I am Willard Thompson and this is my sister Ella. Our family marker is quite imposing, thanks to friends from the Algona Community School District. You may know that Ella and I are responsible for the Thompson scholarships given to many graduating students from Algona High School each year, but you probably don't know much about us.
That's why we decided to come back tonight and refresh your memories.
I was born August 25th, 1884 to Silas and Frances Thompson, who farmed on top of the hill west of Ambrose A. Call Park. Our father had a college education and was a very astute businessman. When livestock prices plummeted in the 1890s, he established a finished meat market on Thorington Street, which helped the townspeople as well as his own bottom line.
Mother was 10 years younger than Father and had been a pupil of his when he taught school in New York. She completed her education at Portland Academy and taught high school mathematics for 4 years before they were married. They moved with me from their Waterloo, New York home, first of all to Ohio and then to Michigan, because they were always on the hunt for cheap and fertile land. But then eventually they settled in Algona in 1878 when I was only 5 years old. I was born on January 21st, 1873, which makes me much older than my brother, although I don't look it. Our parents were considered well-educated and cultured people. Mother was often described as looking like and having the personality of Queen Victoria. Despite this, they were practical people who wanted the best education for their children.
We were pretty good students. After 9 years on the farm, our parents moved to 208 South Harlan Street, just west of the Central School, so that we could more easily attend school in town.
I graduated from Algona High School and then later from Grinnell College in 1895 with special honors.
She was considered one of the best educated women in Iowa.
At first, when I graduated, I accepted a position as teacher in the highest grammar department in the Owatonna, Minnesota public schools. Soon after I accepted that, I was offered the position as assistant principal in Belle Plaine, Iowa. But of course, I didn't accept it. Then, that fall, I entered a hospital in St. Paul with a very serious eye ailment. After months of treatment there, I did return to Algona and lived here for the rest of my life.
Meanwhile, I was attending school in Algona.
Friends later described him as a fair-haired, lively, and clean-cut boy, an excellent student who always seemed to be sizing up the other boys. He was a good-humored young man who took his share of ribbing over his mother's dressing him in knickerbockers long after the other boys were in long pants.
My mother wanted to keep me as her boy as long as possible. I graduated from Algona High School and thence the University of Minnesota in 1905 with honors each time. My sister was able to be present at my graduation. A fraternity brother and I saw the promise of the timber resources in northern Wisconsin. The courses we had taken in college prepared us well to start enterprises of our own, the first of which was the Ladysmith National Bank. I became active in the community, serving on the school board during the building of a beautiful new high school, and also by joining a very active Masonic lodge. With business success assured, I married Henrietta, my college sweetheart. I was involved in several enterprises, including the incorporation of the Flambeau River Lumber Company, of which I served as one of the principal officers.
I stayed with my parents in Algona when I wasn't out traveling. I did attend my brother's graduation in Minneapolis. I also went with a friend to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. And I spent several weeks in Wisconsin helping my sister-in-law recover from a hospital stay for an appendicitis attack. After my father died in 1913, my mother and I spent the winters in Ladysmith with Willard and Henrietta, and later in California when they lived there. During the months in Algona, I occupied myself with the activities of an educated woman in a small town, tutoring several students over the years, serving on the library board and in other capacities at the library, was an active member of the Women's Club, PEO, DAR, and the Congregational Church. I was a lifelong member of that church. I taught a class of high school girls and the LOA class. Other clubs that I belonged to came and went, such as the Shakespeare Club and the Lyceum, which packed in great crowds at the courthouse for our recitations, debates, and musical numbers. I also belonged to the Monday Club, the Tuesday Club, the Halcyon Club. Many of these clubs were literary clubs. You might say that I was a bit of a blue stocking, and I guess I was. I enjoyed young people, but I had no desire to raise my own family. In fact, at one famous PEO debate, quote, "Be it resolved that married life is more carefree than single life," end quote. While Minnie Coate, the high school principal at that time, and I won the negative side. By 1929, I was already thinking of a scholarship for high-performing graduates of Algona High School.
1929. That was just the beginning of many difficult years for people in Wisconsin and elsewhere. The timberland was depleted and the difficulties of the Great Depression began. Undaunted by these distressing conditions, I turned my attention to the oil fields of Oklahoma and Texas, realizing that the demand for petroleum products would continue to increase over time. I joined the Midland Oil Company in Oklahoma City, where a large part of my duties involved lease rights to oil drilling and prospecting for oil in Oklahoma and Texas. My most notable achievement in this area was complying with the necessary legal requirements and arranging for drilling under the very Capitol building in Oklahoma City. Due to our expanding interest, Mrs. Thompson and I moved into spacious quarters in San Antonio, Texas in 1934, while still maintaining an office in Oklahoma City. I think that my successes came from my ability to identify larger than ordinary business opportunities to which I could apply my talents, and my ability to judge the capabilities of others to work with me.
Several years later, Willard and Henrietta were able to take a trip back to Algona. People were so impressed by Willard's energy and his silver-haired dignity as a successful businessman. I was glad that they were able to visit, and I think that Willard was most impressed by our schools and the little town that he had left so long ago. So we continued to talk about a legacy that we could leave to the students of Algona High School.
I had lived a strenuous life and started to suffer from heart problems. Mrs. Thompson and I began to think it was time to slow down. In 1944, we left the busy city of San Antonio for the serene oceanside city of La Jolla, California. There I began to draw up plans for the establishment and safeguarding of the Willard E. Thompson and Ella P. Thompson Educational Trust for the Algona Community High School. The income from this trust was to be used to assist students of outstanding ability to obtain higher education in colleges and universities in Iowa. I set up the trust very carefully with $40,000 originally, and the first students benefited from it in 1958. At the time the trust was established, it was unique in the whole state of Iowa.
The first 4 students to receive scholarships from the income from this trust were Darlene Skogstrom, who received $500, Ted Finley, $300, Maribel Kane and Dave Cole, each $100. The qualifications for receiving these awards were need for assistance, character, scholarship, and general ability of the student. Thousands of students over the years would have been unable to attend college without the help of a Thompson Scholarship.
A plaque was later erected in the center hall of what was the high school and is now the O.B. Lang Apartments. It contained the words used in the original grant, and I quote, "Algona is an unusual community given to high ideals and conservative qualities, unexcelled in neighborly friendship, and a beautiful place in which to live. Ella and I believe that it is one community that will retain its high ideals and always continue to develop the best in citizenship. May it never outgrow these qualities." End quote. After several amendments, the educational fund is now over $5,800,000. Scholarships last year, so I am told, ranged from $1,000 to $3,500 per individual.
After a long and fruitful life in Algona, I moved to Friendship Haven in Fort Dodge, and I died there on January 17, 1961.
The last years of my life were physically very painful, and I was unable to attend Ella's funeral. That saddened me greatly because Ella and I were always close, even though living half a continent apart. We had corresponded frequently, and I had surprised her with little things like an 85th birthday luncheon for her and her friends at the Hotel Algona. I died on September 4th, 1961, in California. In addition to the Willard E. Thompson and Ella P. Thompson Educational Fund for the Algona Community High School, the entire trust I left included $200 a month for life for several relatives, $30,000 to the Library Board of the Algona Public Library, $10,000 to St. Anne's Hospital, $200,000 to Pomona College, $300,000 to Grinnell College, and $200,000 to the Shriners Hospital for crippled children. My instructions for investment by each of these entities were extremely detailed because I wanted the investments to continue to grow.
We thank you for stopping by this evening and reacquainting yourself with the Thompsons. Before you go, I'd like to ask if there was anybody here that did receive a Thompson scholarship
Or someone in your family.
or someone in your family. Kurt, you? Good. Good. Bill? Yeah.
I received $100. I hadn't planned on going to college. The Vietnam War was going on. And I got a $100 scholarship. I went to Iowa State, and it was the best thing I've ever done. And I thank the Thompsons big time.
How many, did you have children?
Pardon?
No.
Thompsons did not have children.
No.
Neither of them.
The reason I asked, my sister graduated from Lone Rock with a Willard Thompson.
Oh, really?
Okay.
And that would have been in 1947.
Wow.
And I wondered if
He
it was a
graduated
family
from college
name.
in 05.
Yeah.
But they,
Different families.
it must be a different family because
Strange they choose that
this,
same name.
they started, the first ones were in 1958 here in Algona.
The recipients were
So-
first.
Thank
So-
you.
It's a great night to have company.
Well, hello. You'll have to forgive my lack of hospitality, but it's been a long time since we've had visitors. Louis, I'm afraid I don't have a thing to serve them.
Oh, Mary Lena, it's not, they aren't looking for tea and cookies. I think you're here to hear our life stories, right? Right. Okay.
Our life stories? Well, you know how I love to reminisce. Where should we begin?
Oh, I think it'd be great to start when I married the prettiest girl I had ever seen.
Louis, quit your teasing. I think we should start at the beginning.
Oh, all right. I was born January 21st, 1869, near Rockford, Illinois. My parents had immigrated from Germany and settled initially in Wisconsin. They later moved to Illinois. That was, let's see, I had an older sister.
They called her Ida.
Ida. Ida was also born in Illinois, but they took us back to Farmington, Wisconsin to be baptized. My baptismal certificate reads Louis Edward Krantz, K-R-A-N-C. Somewhere along the line, our surname became, as you can see, Krantz, K-R-A-N-T-Z. When I was just an infant, we moved to Grundy County, Iowa.
I too was born in Wisconsin on October 4th, 1871. When I was just 4, we moved to Franklin County, Iowa, where I grew up. My father married twice and had 11 children.
When I was 9, my mother was struggling with childbirth. My father sent me by horseback to get the neighbor lady for help. So I rode through a snowstorm with my horse, but I'm afraid we arrived back too late. She had passed away. My father really struggled with his young family and shortly after remarried. I went to school through the 8th grade, and after the 8th grade, then I stayed home to help my father on the farm. I stayed on the farm and helped him until I was 19. At that time, I found a job as a farmhand in Franklin County near Rockwell. I saved every penny I could, every dollar, to try and buy my own farm after that. And that is where I met the prettiest girl I had ever seen, Miss Mary Lena Wellendorf.
Louis, I have to admit, it wasn't long and I was very smitten. You were very hardworking and handsome too. Who wouldn't be flattered by his attentions? We married on September 23rd, 1891, and shortly after moved to the farm Louis had purchased just north of Sexton.
As Mary Lena said, I had $700 saved that I used to purchase 162.5 acres in Wesley Township. We raised cattle initially, and then later on raised pigs and chickens too.
And we had dairy cows. Louis was instrumental in helping begin the Sexton Creamery where we marketed our products. I often helped with the delivery. Louis, do you remember the time I was driving the buggy and the horses were spooked by something in the road? The hitch they tried to turn around and the hitch broke on the buggy, flipping the buggy over. Luckily I wasn't hurt and I was soon on my way, minus 1 can of cream.
That wasn't your only close call with spirited horses. Remember when you took the children and your friend Della Hager and were headed to church services in Wesley? That time a bolt broke in the tongue. The tongue fell to the ground, which spooked the horses, and they started to run, dragging the carriage from one side of the road to the other. Finally, the evener broke, and that allowed the horses to get away without dragging the carriage any further.
Yes, we were very lucky. Della had a broken arm and I had a dislocated elbow. Otherwise, we just had scrapes and bruises. I thank the Lord many times over for his protection.
I shudder to think what could have happened to my entire family.
Speaking of family, let me tell you about our 3 wonderful children. Our son, Raymond, was born in May of 1893, followed 2 years later by our daughter Hazel. And Lucy Pearl Lucy, our youngest, came along in 1902. And they were wonderful children, weren't
Yes, they were. Yep.
They were so hardworking, and it took all of us to keep the farm operation going. Their hard work did not go unnoticed, and one time the Algona newspaper published an article telling how Raymond was equal to his father in farming and excelled in the mechanic line. It also stated that Pearl and Hazel could cook a meal as good as any woman and could drive a team better than a lot of men.
Through the years, our operation grew. I acquired more land, and I would travel by rail with my cattle for sale in Chicago. I was on the board of directors that established the Farmers Savings Bank of Sexton in 1905, initially serving as the vice president. In 1914, I ran for 3rd District Supervisor. Although I lost in the primary, I thoroughly enjoyed meeting my neighbors and discussing the topics of the day.
When we first moved to the area, we attended church services in the Methodist churches of Sexton and Wesley. Around the turn of the century, a group of neighbors decided we would worship in the Ward Schoolhouse, which was located in Wesley Township, where we lived. Our congregation grew and we wanted a church building of our own. Our pastor at the time, Reverend Howe, knew of the Doan Eddy Church in Portland Township, which was no longer in use.
Our congregation purchased that church for $1 from the Methodist Conference, and another $1 purchased a future site for our church across the road north from the Ward Schoolhouse. In 1914, let me get this right, Doan Good Hope Methodist Episcopal Church was incorporated. It's a mouthful. In January of 1915, we moved that church in sections on 2 sleds that were tied together and pulled by 4 horses. Once we headed to the site, a carpenter, Jacob Johnson, thank you. Jacob Johnson helped put the church back together. Our congregation helped rebuild, plaster, and paint that church.
We were so excited about our new church that we held several fundraisers in our home, one of which was a basket social, the proceeds of which went to the moving fund. That church was a very big part of our lives. I was a member of the Methodist Women's Club, and Lewis and I helped the congregation in any way that was needed. We remained active in that church until 1918 when we moved to Algona. And Lewis, it saddens me to know that Doan Church is no longer in existence.
As Mary Lena said, in 1918 we moved to Algona, 202 Ridgely Street, and that house is still standing. Although I was no longer living on the farm, I remained active in the banking business, which definitely had its ups and downs. Also, I managed our investments, and I did something else.
Raised some cattle.
Oh yes, and I was still raising some cattle. My wife became active in the Methodist Church in Algona, and we thoroughly enjoyed spending time with our children and grandchildren.
I really enjoyed our time in Algona, the many friends that we made there. But over time, my health began to fail, and when I was in a weakened condition, I contracted pneumonia. I died on December 22nd, 1934, at the age of 63, and was buried here on Christmas Eve.
I was really lost without Mary Lena. My daughter Pearl and her husband J. Brian Asa were living on the home farm and invited me to come live with them, which I did. I spent my winters in California near Long Beach. It was there in 1946 that while I was out walking, I was hit by a streetcar. Although they thought my injuries were life-threatening at first, it turned out that I was only severely bruised, the worst of the injuries to my legs.
You had a hard time
Yeah, I never fully
after that.
recovered from that, and that was the last winter I was able to travel south to warm climates.
Lewis then moved in with our daughter Hazel in Waterloo, Iowa, and her husband Ray Hutchison. It was there he had a heart attack, and after lingering in a coma for 5 days, he died on November 7, 1950, at the age of 81. A few days later, he was brought here and buried next to me.
You know, Marilena, I think that $700 that we used to buy our first farm in Kossuth County was some of the best money we ever spent. Helping build the town of Sexton was challenging and not always a very good personal investment, but I don't think I would change a thing.
I agree, Lewis. That farm helped support several generations of our family, and I understand it's been honored as a century farm. And with the many friends and acquaintances we had, we helped build a strong community in the Sexton area. Yes, we truly built a good life here.
Hello, and thank you for stopping by. My name is Ella Algona Blackford. I'm sure you're wondering how I got my unusual middle name. Well, I'm going to tell you about my parents, John and Mary Blackford, who are buried here. And if you listen closely to my story, you will also learn the story behind my name. My parents, John Ellison Blackford and Mary Minerva Call Blackford, were both born in Ohio. When just a boy, my father's family moved to Indiana, where he grew up. His schooling was limited due to the frontier conditions, but he did attend the district school for 2 terms. There he developed a love of reading and learning. My mother was the 5th of 8 children, born to Asa and Mary Call. Her father died when she was 5 years old, leaving my grandmother to raise the children on her own. Left destitute, the family struggled to survive. Due to her hard work and faith, their mother managed to keep them together. John and Mary were married September 28, 1845, in St. Joseph County, Indiana. Their first 2 sons were born there. In 1854, Mary's 2 brothers, Asa and Ambrose Call, had established a town located on the East Fork of the Des Moines River in north-central Iowa. They had staked their claim and built cabins along with a few other hardy pioneers. For a time, the village was known as Call's Grove, but was later officially named Algona by Asa's wife, Sarah Call. The 2 brothers wrote to my parents, urging them to come and help settle the new town. Father came from a long line of pioneers, from whom he inherited a spirit of adventure. He and Mother decided to answer the call of the frontier. They began to prepare for the trip during the summer of 1855. They must have spent hours deciding what to take with them. They started with a yoke of oxen and a canvas-covered wagon. It had a good box, but no spring seat, which must have been uncomfortable for my mother, who was expecting me at the time. The wagon carried a heavy load, which included Mother's stove, which was of cast iron, a large clothes chest made of cherry wood, and a solid wood bedstead made of beech and hard maple, along with clothing, bedding, dishes, and food for the trip. There also had to be room for them and my 2 older brothers, Edwin, age 9, and Ernest, age 3. The family began their journey of over 500 miles from northern Indiana in early September with a can of pine tar for the wheels swinging beneath the wagon and a long single-barreled shotgun hung inside the wagon. They camped along the way, and Mother cooked their meals over an open fire. When they neared the Mississippi River, my father traded the oxen for a team of horses, and ever afterward said that he had made a very poor trade. He had hoped to make better progress with the horses, but they didn't know better than the sturdy oxen. After crossing the Mississippi near Lyons, Iowa, they began to travel by compass to the west and north, as dependable trails were scarce. In some places, Father would have to go ahead to select a route along a ridge to avoid sloughs, and when he had found it, he would place his hat on the barrel of his gun and hold it up so that Mother could see his location over the tall prairie grasses and drive the wagon to him. Their objective point was Clear Lake, where Father would get directions as to the best route to take to the Call settlement. Although the Call settlement was almost directly west of Clear Lake, they were advised to go around the south end of the lake and across the flat country to avoid wetlands. Near the current location of the town of Livermore, they began to follow the Des Moines River to the north, crossing the river just south of what we know as Irvington. They finally arrived in Algona on October 10, 1855. Although a cabin had been built for them in anticipation of their arrival, another family was living there while they were working on their own cabin. An addition was hastily added to Ace's cabin, and the family moved in, where they remained through the winter. I was born there on January 18, 1856, the first white child born in Algona. So that's how I came to be named after Algona. That spring, after a particularly severe winter, we moved to our own log cabin. My uncle Ambrose set up a sawmill that summer, and my father was put in charge of Sawyer. As new settlers came, he was kept busy providing lumber for construction. In 1857, during the Indian Scare, following the Spirit Lake Massacre, he worked round the clock at the mill, sawing planks for the use on the fort built in Algona for protection of the settlers. During this time, he sent his family to stay with Asa and Sarah while he stayed at the mill, catching what little sleep he could. My father used to tell the story of an incident which occurred during this time. At a meeting of area citizens, they'd agreed upon the firing of 2 shots in rapid succession after dark as an early warning signal of the approach of Indians. 2 men who were close neighbors of our family had been away and knew nothing of the signal that had been decided upon. While crossing the river, their guns got wet, so when they got home, they fired them to clean and reload them. My father, hearing the signal, grasped his gun and told my mother to run with the children into the darkness of the bush surrounding the cabin and to remain there until he returned. My brother Ernest refused to leave the house until his shoes were put on and laced. Fearing an outcry which would alert the Indians, Mother held her nerves in check while kneeling on the floor in the light of the fireplace, tediously picking out the knots in the hard leather shoestrings, and then putting on and lacing the little shoes. Once that was done, she hurried us out into the shelter of the brush until my father arrived home and called to us to come out and that all was safe. Our family continued to grow. James Claros was born in 1858, Mary Kate in 1862, and baby brother George in 1869. A larger 2-story home was built on the site where our log cabin had stood, where my parents lived the rest of their lives. Father was elected the first Justice of the Peace, and from that point on became very involved in politics. He served 2 terms as representative from this district in the Iowa legislature. He often commented that my district at this time comprised 7 counties, and in making my canvass, I frequently traveled 40 miles to see a single voter. He served 1 term as county treasurer. He was one of the members of the Iowa delegation to the National Republican Convention that nominated Lincoln for president the first time. My father was a charter member of the Grange and served as worthy master of the Iowa State Grange for about 10 years. He also ran a store in Algona called The Grange, where my sister Mary Kate and I both worked. My mother was the heart of our family. She was very devoted to her children and took such good care of us. She was an excellent cook. Her jellies, preserves, and pickles won many awards at the local fair. Besides being a wonderful mother to us, she helped to raise Uncle Asa's youngest children after Aunt Sarah died. She also helped Aunt Nancy to learn the ways of homemaking after her marriage to Uncle Ambrose, since Nancy's mother had died young and was not there to guide her. Since Ambrose and Nancy's home was nearby, whenever they needed help, they would hang a red blanket out the window, and my mother would soon be at their side. She was so kind to all who knew her that she was affectionately known as Aunt Mary to everyone. For us children, frontier life was grand. We spent many hours running through the woods, sledding down the snow-covered hills, fishing in the nearby river, and playing with the other children in town. We very much enjoyed the company of our cousins. We attended school in several homes until the town hall was built, and then school for the older children was held there as well as church services. My mother was one of the organizers when the Baptist church was established and remained a lifelong member. Reverend Tenney of that congregation conducted her funeral service at our family home following Mother's death from a stroke on March 30th, 1905, at the age of 77. Early in 1911, Father celebrated his 86th birthday. He received a card from one of his oldest and dearest friends, August Zoltan, enclosed with a poem August had written in Father's honor. It read, "Some sad day I'll take your trembling hand in mine, and plead the passing moments for delay, when one of us must pass beyond the mortal, and one must stay. It matters little which shall first be called, to venture out upon the unknown ways. But oh, may God be very kind and gentle then to the one who stays." Father passed from this life on August 20th, 1911, leaving August behind to mourn him. In 1913, our family donated some land to the city of Algona in memory of our parents. 2 pillars were erected on either side of the entrance, and a large wrought iron sign with the words Blackford Park was hung over the entrance with matching gates beneath it. Dedication plaques were placed on the pillars, honoring our parents and committing the park to the use of the people for rest, recreation, and clean sports. When I grew up, I married Eugene Clark, a local attorney, and we raised 4 children. My husband passed away in 1902. My sister Mary Kate died of cancer in 1910 and was buried here. After my father's death, the rest of us all moved away. Edwin died in California and James in St. Louis, but 3 of us, Ernest, George, and I, were brought back here to be buried here in Riverview. So now I rest for eternity beneath the soil of the town whose name I forever share.